The New Testament says no one has ever seen God, but the Old Testament says Abraham did. God appeared to him in person, and it's not a one-time thing. He shows up in a human form somewhere around 50 times across the Old Testament. Most of us were just never taught to see them. So what happened here? Is this poetic language, or did God really appear to Abraham? The first clue is in Genesis chapter 12, where God told Abraham he'd give his descendants the land that would become Israel. Notice anything strange here? Then the Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." I knew this story since I was a kid, but years later when I reread the story, I said, wait a minute. What do you mean God appeared? Apparently, when God made this promise to Abraham, he didn't just float that thought into Abraham's head. Abraham wasn't just wandering around one day and said, "Hey, I just had this thought that one day this land is going to belong to me. Oh boy! Is that my own thought? Nah, it must be from God." It's not like that. God decided to tell Abraham what he was going to do in a way that wasn't ambiguous. So he showed up personally, so it could not be mistaken that this was actually from God.
Do not be afraid.
Who are you?
You know who I am.
This is what God really said and promised to Abraham.
I want you to have all this. You and your children.
That's a big deal for someone who's skeptical about the Bible. Because if you don't understand that, you might think that maybe these writers of the Bible just misheard God, and they wrote things that they thought were from God, but they really weren't. Well, let's explore that a little more. This first appearance to Abraham, like a lot of them, has no indication that this was a vision or a dream. In fact, this verse actually says God appeared twice. So I don't think the writer forgot that he already told us that. I think maybe he's making sure that we saw that we didn't miss. God actually appeared here visibly.
He appeared to me.
You must have had too much wine for dinner.
No, I'm serious.
What did he say?
That this land will belong to our children.
Our children?
That's what he told me.
I don't see how that's possible. Was it really him?
I'm sure of it.
Now, I thought I'd always been told that God didn't have a body. So you can see why this would be a little bit confusing. I always heard, you can't see him, he's an invisible spirit. These are the things we were taught as a kid. So we come across this and we're like, what's going on here? That can't be. I'm not going to pretend that it's not theologically complicated. But before we try to explain it, let's just first look at what actually happened. Because some have said that this idea of God appearing in the Old Testament is just an idea that Christians made up later, trying to force a connection between the Old and New Testaments. Okay, well, I'm going to be honest, I am coming from the Christian perspective, but let's not take my word for it. An objective detective always looks for evidence that's unbiased. So let's look at what the Jews thought about these appearances. Exhibit A, Philo. This guy was alive when Jesus was born, and he outlived Jesus. He believed that God sent a mediator to meet with Abraham and Moses and people like that. What Philo calls this mediator is eye-opening. The firstborn Word, the eldest of his angels, as the great archangel of many names. What does that mean? It wasn't just any old angel either. Next, Philo called this angel the authority and the name of God, the Word. So now things are really starting to heat up, and the obvious clue here is the Word. Christians will probably recognize that as a name for God and Jesus in the Bible, especially if you look at chapters like John 1. But there's more. The mediator was called the name of God. Now, nobody speaks like this today, so whenever we come across passages of the Bible or old ancient texts that talk like this, we kind of zone out. But this is actually like a huge bombshell clue here. Philo's not just using flowery language or poetry here. In Jewish tradition, eventually the Jews became so uncomfortable saying God's name, Yahweh, for fear that they would misuse it, that they stopped saying it out loud altogether.
Don't say his name. If you say his name 3 times, he will appear.
Maybe she wrote it down.
No, I can't spell it.
Kind of like how you can't say Voldemort in Harry Potter, except, with the good guy. Instead, they call him Hashem. That literally just means the name. Imagine introducing yourself to someone and they're like, "What's your name?" And you're like, "The name." Oh. So if you think about it, there's something going on here, because otherwise, this is just weird. It's basically a placeholder and a sign of deep respect and maybe a little fear. So when Philo calls this mediator the name of God, he's saying this figure who mediates between God and us, it is God in a form. Although Philo wouldn't quite say it that way, and he wouldn't have said it's Jesus, but others would. To Philo, it was a divine being, more than an angel but lower than God. Almost like, if you squint hard enough, like a glimmer of the Trinity. Moses saw him. Gideon saw him. The New Testament writers recognized him in the Old Testament. We're going to find all of his appearances on this channel, so watch this video next.